The Southern African Development Community SADC, in partnership with the Global Water Partnership GWP Southern Africa, convened the 2008 SADC Multi-Stakeholder Water Dialogue in Maseru in Lesotho to discuss how the SADC region could respond and adapt to the impacts of climate change and water reduction. The SADC Multi-Stakeholder Water Dialogue is an annual event organized by the SADC Water Division, and the theme of this year's dialogue was Watering Development in SADC, Rising Above the Climate Change Threat. Throughout the session, certain factors and topics were discussed in order to better achieve solutions to some of the challenges being faced. These included an improved understanding of the climate change phenomenon, an increased awareness of the hydrological change scenarios caused by climate change impacting on livelihoods and economies, specifically agriculture, health, the environment, tourism, and energy sectors. The exchanging of current best practices on resilience building, which focused on adapting strategies by the different sectors and their implications on water resources development and management. The SADC region needs to be better prepared to protect people, economies, and the environment against these water-related disasters arising from climate change. Water infrastructure is important in coping with climate change impacts. However, water infrastructure has been unevenly developed amongst SADC countries, resulting in historically uneven water allocation and accrued benefits. Some of the available infrastructure is often not effectively operated and maintained, therefore unable to meet the growing demands for development and services. This calls for adequate financing of water infrastructure. Yet, the financing of water infrastructure has proved to be difficult due to the fact that water projects are capital intensive, with low returns and long payback periods, making water projects difficult in attracting funds. The discussion in Maseru was on financing water infrastructure, focusing on what needs to be done to support infrastructure development in the region.
Welcome then to our panel discussion. What I thought we would perhaps do to start with our discussion for today is to allow our panelists to perhaps present their message that they would like the delegates here today to take away with them. May I now introduce you to our panel of experts, starting off with Mr. Pera Ramoedi. Thank you for joining us. Senior Program Manager from the SADC Directorate of Infrastructure and Services. We're also joined by Dr. Charles Reeve, Attaché to the European Commission delegation to South Africa, tasked with the special responsibility for water. Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Masilo Pakwe, Chief Executive Officer for the Lesotho Highlands Development Authority. Thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Len Abrams, thank you for joining us. From the World Bank, Senior Water Resources Specialist for Southern Africa. And lastly, Mr. Reginald Tekateka, who is here today holding two portfolios, I believe, Chairman of the Global Water Partnership for Southern Africa, and also Chairman of the African Network of River Basin Organizations, or ANVO. Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Pera Ramoedi, a SADC perspective on water infrastructure?
Thank you, Alice. Definitely, I will try to give you some form of a perspective from the SADC region in terms of infrastructure. Now, what the region feels it's important is now we have created this enabling environment from 1999 to 2005. We should now embark on a hard infrastructure development program, which should address, among others, the imperatives that are put across to us by the MDGs that we have to meet by 2015. And of course, other developmental aspirations that SADC as a region has. Water, it has been said, and I want to repeat, is a means to an end and not an end in itself. And therefore, we have to make sure that it is available, accessible, and therefore can be used by those who need it at the time of need. And we feel that in comparison with the other regions of the world, the Southern African region still lags behind in terms of bridging the infrastructure divide, particularly relating to water, where access is still very much of a problem.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Moving on to Dr. Charles Reeve, perhaps you want to speak to us briefly on donor engagement and coordination on financing water infrastructure.
My first one is relating to climate change. From my perspective, the climate change has two dimensions to it. There's the gradual shift of climate, which may in certain areas lead to warmer climates or wetter climates. But I think more importantly, and the ramification we're seeing immediately, is the changes in extreme events, and particularly floods and droughts. And I think how to deal with those two aspects of climate change is very important. When we come down to deal with some of the direct infrastructure issues, I would really repeat something we heard this morning, which to me is very important, is the balance between infrastructure, governance and institutions. It's all very well having a lot of infrastructure, but if you're unable to have the institutions to operate and manage that infrastructure, it actually won't be used to the benefit of people. Of course, you then, when you start talking about infrastructure, you have issues of the large-scale infrastructure, such as large dams, which we've heard quite a lot about. But one of the things I reflected on this morning is the number of small-scale retention structures that exist. And these are very important structures at local level for sustainable livelihoods and survival. To try to return directly to your question, Chair, about financing, some of the questions I have in mind is the balance between grant finance and loan finance. Two very different things, both of which are available in the region, but the question is, are they being used in the right way with the greatest beneficial effects? And of course, finally, there's the question of the use of government finance and external finance, whether it be from international financial institutions or the private sector. So these are some of the issues which I see as being particularly important, and areas where I feel not necessarily answers need to be found, but we need to be thinking about these sorts of issues when we start taking decisions about the future development of infrastructure in the SADC region.